The candlelight caught the edge of my water glass and fractured it into a thin band of gold. A quartet murmured through a Cole Porter standard somewhere beyond the glass wall, and Lake Union sat black and flat like a slate. I watched the reflection of my mother's hands in the table's shine, restless, elegant, ready to perform pride for the room. Natalie leaned back in her chair, ivory sweater, unblemished, one manicured finger circling the stem of her champagne flute. When I said simply, "I've been looking at houses," the sound in our private dining room thinned, as if someone turned a dial and bled the air out. My mother's mouth tilted into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Natalie's smirk arrived like a reflex. Kyle set down his knife like a judge setting down a gavel. And then they laughed first, a warm chuckle, then the kind that holds a person at arm's length. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. If you've ever been treated like you didn't matter by the very people who should have had your back, hit that like button and share this story with someone who'll understand. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. But to understand how that dinner changed everything you need to know, the house I grew up in didn't allow many surprises. My mother Diana kept our Seattle life polished like the good silver. After my father died when I was 12, she pressed grief into neat corners and called it discipline. She ironed shirts until the seams were razor straight and recited practical advice over pancakes as if it were prayer. Appearances buy stability, she'd say, tapping the oak table with a red-polished nail. Smart choices build safety. By smart choices, she usually meant the path my sister walked: honors internships, the right wedding, with the right people in the right photographs. Natalie learned early to speak my mother's language. She could tell you the median sale price of a house in Bellevue before she could change a flat tire. By 28, she had a 4,000-square-foot showpiece, a luxury SUV, and a smile that never cracked in front of strangers. People loved the sheen. My mother loved the sheen. She loved the way servers greeted Natalie by name, the way neighbors murmured Fletcher with respect, the holiday cards that looked like magazine spreads. I moved differently. I loved the neon wash on Capitol Hill after the rain, the smell of coffee drifting up a narrow stairwell to a third-floor walk-up, the way a sketchbook can swallow noise. I studied design and digital media and learned to build quiet things that worked for people who didn't have a boardroom cheering for them. My mother called them projects, said the word with the soft edge of a dish towel. Artists starve, Jade, she added, sometimes folding the towel over the oven handle like a period at the end of a sentence. Sundays kept the ritual of comparison alive. The oak table at my mother's place bowed under roast chicken salad, dressed just so, and little glass bowls of things that glittered. The conversation came pre-seasoned. My mother would open with a headline, "Natalie's firm just moved her to a bigger account," or "Kyle says the market is unbelievable this quarter." Someone would say, "Equity and portfolio," and my small updates would be received like a polite knock that no one intended to answer. When I tried to share something, I built a brand that finally lifted a bakery's sales, a website that let a nonprofit accept donations without friction. The faces across from me smiled and slid the topic toward granite countertops and outdoor kitchens. Some wounds don't announce themselves all at once. They arrive on the backs of 100 small moments. A hand on your wrist when you reach for a word. A laugh too loud for the room. A well-meant suggestion that you accept less because more isn't meant for you. I let those moments pass through me until passing turned into swallowing, and swallowing turned into silence. It is a quiet thing, learning not to offer your heart where it will be weighed and priced. My mother's 58th birthday dinner sat high on the hill and looked down at the city like it belonged to her. Canlis was a room built for good behavior. Glass dark wood servers who floated more than they walked. I arrived early the way I always did, wearing a black dress that fit like a decision. I set a small velvet box near my mother's plate, a vintage brooch I'd hunted for weeks because it matched one my grandmother wore every Christmas. The window threw a last ribbon of honey over the lake and pulled it back again. I practiced the kind of answers that leave no blood. They arrived as a unit, my mother with lipstick the color of winter berries, Natalie in cream, Kyle in navy blue confidence, the twins with matching blazers and the careful quiet that comes from too many shushes. Air kisses a compliment about the view, the slide of leather chairs. Kyle ordered champagne that cost what my first 5 paychecks did. My mother raised her flute. To family and prosperity, she said, giving half the toast to the reflection of Natalie's life in the window. The servers set down plates that looked like still life paintings. Natalie held court with photos of a kitchen remodel Italian marble, this time brushed brass, that while my mother hummed her approval. Smart, she said a word that warmed when it applied to them. Already added $70,000 in value. The twins scrolled quietly thumbs, quick taught to be seen but not loud. I asked about soccer and science projects, and they answered like boys who knew there was a right way to be. When I said I'd been looking at houses, the sound of cutlery on porcelain made a thin, embarrassed music. My mother's laugh started soft, then relaxed into full bloom. Natalie touched my hand the way you pat a child who has announced she's moving to the moon. Sweetheart. My mother said, warmth frosting each syllable. Be realistic. Houses in Seattle require serious income. Natalie nodded, eyes shining with sisterly concern. Maybe a tiny condo if you get a more stable job, she suggested, voice smooth and precise. You need consistent income, Jade, a real ladder to climb. Kyle joined, pleased to be useful. Down payment alone is $100,000 for anything decent, he said, carving his steak like a chart. Property taxes would knock you flat. Insurance, maintenance, landscaping. He smiled the way a man smiles when he's solved a problem no one asked him to solve. Homeownership isn't for everyone, especially creatives who you know struggle with long-term planning. I felt the old heat crawl up my neck and settle along my jaw. The hurt wasn't new. It had simply put on a better suit. I looked at the brooch box by my mother's plate and thought of my grandmother's laugh, the way it sounded like a bell in a hallway. I inhaled slowly, held it, and let it go. That's wonderful about the kitchen, I said, voice even. Italian marble really is timeless. Dessert arrived with a single candle and the polite chorus of happy birthday. My mother opened Natalie's gift first, an envelope promising a weekend spa retreat, and turned her face toward the room so her delight would be properly seen. When she lifted the lid of my velvet box, the brooch caught the light and made a small sun on the tablecloth. How unique, she said, smiling. Very creative. Just like you. She did not pin it on. The server smiled kindly at me as he lifted plates. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for yourself is refuse to argue with a story that doesn't know you. I felt a slow calm slide into my bones. I smiled, and it made my mother blink. Is everything all right? She asked, as if I had changed some rule mid-game. You seem different tonight. Everything's perfect, I said, and the words were finally true because perfection is a decision, not a consensus. Natalie tilted her head, scenting a wrinkle in the script. Care to share? She asked, eyebrows lifted in practiced curiosity. No, I said gently. I don't think I will. I rose, kissed my mother's cheek, told her happy birthday again, and gathered my coat. The quartet shifted into something slow. The city's lights shook themselves awake beyond the glass. I walked past tables where other families were performing their own versions of love and left mine to finish dessert without me. The parking lot smelled like wet cedar and gasoline. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and watched my breath ghost the windshield. The tears came then, not loud, not dramatic, but honest. They weren't for the things they said. Those were familiar as the sound of our kitchen clock. They were for the years I learned to tuck away my best parts, like fragile dishes too nice for everyday use. They were for the way silence had become a shelter and a sentence. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, confident as always. "We just worry about you, darling. You need something stable. Let's talk about practical steps." Another from Natalie, efficient. "I can introduce you to a mortgage broker who handles your situation. We'll help you figure out realistic options." The messages stacked neatly like mailers that assume you need the same thing as everyone else. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and listened to the rain start. It tapped the roof in a tight, steady pattern like a metronome training a heart. The wipers whispered across the glass. Somewhere inside that rhythm, a single thought rose and took its seat. I don't owe them the shape of my dream before it's strong enough to stand on its own legs. Back at my apartment, the hallway light hummed the thin song of old wiring. I hung my coat, set my keys in the little ceramic dish a friend had made, and stood in the doorway of the small living room that had held so many beginnings. On the bookshelf, a row of sketchbooks leaned like shoulders. On the desk, a notebook lay open to a page of numbered tasks. I slid off my heels and pressed my feet into the rug until I felt the floor say, "Here." I brewed coffee, though it was late the way my father used to do when he had decisions to make. The mug warmed my palms. I wrote 3 sentences on an index card and taped it to the edge of my monitor. The first line read, "You do not need permission to become the person you already are." The second, "Tell the truth without apology." The third, "Protect the quiet until it blooms." Injustice didn't feel like a slap anymore. It felt like a map with all the wrong landmarks erased. And if I was going to find my way, I would have to stop asking directions from people who insisted every road led back to their address. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and turned off the kitchen light. The apartment dipped into a soft dark. Outside, the street kept its own council tires hissing on wet asphalt, a bus sighing at the corner, a porch light blinking on across the alley. I stood by the window and watched a couple share an umbrella, their heads tipped toward each other, faces hidden. The city breathed. My shoulders lowered. Somewhere out there, a house waited with the right bones and the right light, a place that wouldn't make me smaller to fit. I didn't know then how the truth would break open or who would be standing on the other side of a door when it did. I only knew that the next time I sat at my mother's table, the story would not be the same, and I would not arrive empty-handed. I closed the curtains, finished the last sip of coffee, and let the night hold what I wasn't ready to say out loud. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of rain against the window. I sat on the couch, a blanket around my shoulders, watching droplets race each other down the glass. Somewhere in the city below, laughter drifted up from a passing group, but in here, it was just me and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The calm felt earned, but under it sat a familiar ache, the silence after pretending everything was fine. For days after my mother's birthday dinner, I replayed their laughter in my head. Not the light kind, but the sort that comes from certainty, the certainty that I would never measure up. It was strange how a few careless words could reopen every old bruise. I'd built a life full of quiet achievements, yet somehow one dinner had made me feel 12 again, standing in our old kitchen, being told I lived in a fantasy. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another text from my mother. "I found a few articles about financial planning for creatives. You should read them if you're serious about owning a home someday." I set the phone down without replying. A few seconds later, it buzzed again, this time from Natalie. "Kyle knows a great mortgage broker who works with people who have inconsistent income. Want me to connect you? It might be your only shot at qualifying for anything decent." The words were wrapped in concern, but the tone was the same condescension disguised as help. I stared at the messages until the screen dimmed. They still believed I lived paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make rent in my small apartment. They had no idea that my signature now sat on a contract worth millions, The secrecy had become its own protection, a way to build something free from their judgment. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat by the window, scrolling through home listings. I wasn't sure which I liked more, the houses themselves or the feeling of possibility they carried. I'd already begun working with a realtor named Sarah Thompson, a woman known for handling high-profile clients with discretion. We had spent weeks visiting properties, but none felt quite right yet. I wasn't looking for luxury. I wanted warmth, a place that felt like mine. When Sarah sent photos of a renovated Craftsman in Madison Park, something inside me shifted. The house stood on a corner lot, shaded by old trees, its porch wide and welcoming. A soft light glowed through the windows, even in the cloudy afternoon shots. The description said 5 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, and a view of Lake Washington. I called Sarah immediately. "I want to see it," I said. "Tomorrow if possible." The next day, the house smelled faintly of cedar and rain. The moment I stepped through the doorway, I knew. The wood floors gleamed under soft light, and the windows framed the water in a way that made the whole room breathe. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt like a beginning. "The asking price is $2.7 million, Sarah said. "There are already a few interested buyers." "I'll offer 3, I replied. Surprising even myself. "All cash. 2-week closing." Sarah blinked. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "And I'd like a confidentiality clause. No press, no name until after closing." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Understood. May I ask why the secrecy?" I ran my hand along the polished banister. "Let's just say I'm planning a surprise." That night, I signed the offer paperwork, the numbers clear and deliberate. A small thrill ran through me as I realized where this house sat, just 4 blocks from Natalie's mansion, in an even more desirable section of the neighborhood. Fate, it seemed, had a quiet sense of humor. Weeks passed in a blur of design meetings and logistics. I worked closely with interior decorators, selecting furniture fabrics and artwork that reflected pieces of myself I had kept hidden for years. I chose colors that felt like calm, deep blue for the study, pale gold for the kitchen light, a soft gray for the bedroom walls. Every corner carried intention. This wasn't about status. It was about finally shaping a space that told the truth of who I was. During that time, the messages from my family didn't stop. My mother called one afternoon while I was reviewing cabinetry plans. Her tone carried the weight of a lecture disguised as concern. "Jade, sweetheart, I've been thinking about our talk at my birthday dinner," she began. "I worry that you have unrealistic expectations about property ownership." I smiled to myself, running my finger along a sample of oak trim. "Do you?" I asked. "Your father and I struggled for years to buy our first home," she continued. "We both had stable, sensible jobs. I don't want you to set yourself up for disappointment." "I appreciate your concern, Mom." "I could help you, you know," she added. "Not much, but maybe enough for a deposit on a small apartment, if you'd consider a more practical career path." I paused, almost laughing at the irony. "What would you consider practical?" "Natalie mentioned an opening at her firm," she said, brightening. "Entry-level marketing. It has benefits and growth potential. You'd be working with real professionals." I thanked her and promised to think about it, even though I knew I wouldn't. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone. No amount of money could replace the kind of understanding I still wished for. It was strange success didn't erase the loneliness. It just made it quieter. A few days later, Natalie insisted we meet for coffee to talk about your future. I agreed, partly curious, partly resigned. The cafe she chose was all marble counters and expensive pastries, the kind of place where she felt at home. She arrived 15 minutes late, shopping bags in hand, her voice soft with false concern. "Mom's really worried about you," she said, stirring her latte. "We all are." I waited. "It's admirable that you want to improve your situation," she continued, "but you have to be realistic about your limitations." "My limitations," I repeated. "Financial ones," she said smoothly. "Property in Seattle is for people with serious careers and stability. Kyle says the market demands liquidity." She said it like it was a law of physics. "Kyle says a lot of things," I murmured. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "He's an expert. He manages portfolios worth millions." "Good for him," I said quietly. Natalie sighed, then leaned forward as if offering kindness. "Look, we've talked about it. Kyle and I might be willing to co-sign on a small condo for you, something modest, but respectable. Of course, you'd need to show financial responsibility first. Maybe take a personal finance course. Kyle could recommend one." For a moment, I just looked at her. My sister, who had spent her life collecting other people's approval like pearls, genuinely believed she was being generous. "Thank you," I said at last. "I'll consider it." She smiled, relieved. "Good. I'll have Kyle send over some listings." We spent the rest of the time making small talk about her children and a charity gala she was chairing. When I left, the air outside felt cleaner than it had in months. That night, I called Rachel, one of the few people who knew the truth about my company and the impending move. I almost told them today, I admitted, just to see their faces. "Why didn't you?" she asked. "Because it would have been about them," I said. "Their shock, their opinions. I want this to be about me, about what I built, not about proving anyone wrong." Rachel smiled through the phone. "That's growth." Her words lingered with me for days. I had spent years craving their approval, bending to fit their definitions of success. Somewhere along the way, that need had turned into something else, a quiet strength that no longer required applause. The final week before closing, I packed my apartment in silence. Each box felt like a small goodbye to who I had been, to what I had endured, to the version of myself that once needed permission to dream. Marcus stopped by one evening to help carry boxes. He was the one person who understood what this house really meant. "You ready?" he asked, resting a box on the counter. "More than I've ever been," I said. He nodded. "Then don't look back." Moving day came with sunlight breaking through a thin veil of clouds. I arrived early, standing in the empty foyer with the keys clutched in my hand. The house smelled of fresh paint and pine. For a moment, I let the silence wash over me. Every room held promise: the office, with its view of the garden, the kitchen with marble counters that gleamed like morning light, the studio where I'd finally have space to create without apology. This wasn't just property. It was proof that I could build a life outside their narrative. I whispered to the walls, "This is my truth." When the movers arrived, the house filled with motion boxes, stacked footsteps echoing down the hallway, voices calling instructions. I stayed mostly in the background, directing quietly, absorbing each sound. The life I'd been crafting in secret was taking physical shape around me. Just before noon, as I unpacked dishes in the kitchen, my phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Driving past Natalie's neighborhood on our way to lunch. Thought we might stop by your apartment after to drop off some books for you." I glanced at the screen, then back at the view outside, sunlight glinting off Lake Washington. Another text appeared, this time from Natalie. "With Mom near our house. Saw moving trucks down the street. Someone's buying that big corner property finally. Want to meet for lunch after I move to the window, heart beginning to pound." Outside, a familiar silver SUV slowed to a crawl at the curb. I could see them clearly, my sister in the driver's seat, my mother leaning forward, both watching the movers unload. Their faces tilted, curious, unaware. The universe, it seemed, had its own timing. I stood there motionless, the phone still in my hand. For a long moment, I considered hiding behind the curtain, letting them drive away. But then another thought surfaced, calm, steady, undeniable. Maybe it was time. I watched as they parked across the street, still craning their necks, confusion flickering across their faces as they recognized a few of my belongings being carried inside. My phone vibrated again, another call from Mom, then from Natalie. I didn't answer either. Instead, I typed a message to them both, paused, and read it once before pressing send. "Get off my property!" The words glowed on the screen, sharp and final. Through the window, I watched their reactions, my mother's hand flying to her mouth. Natalie frozen in disbelief. They looked up, scanning the windows, until their eyes found mine. I didn't move. I just stood there, steady and unflinching, as years of dismissal met the simplest truth: they had underestimated the wrong person. And though the moment felt electric, I wasn't angry. I was ready. My phone was still warm in my hand when the message disappeared into the air. Through the tall front window, I watched them freeze at the curb, two silhouettes framed by sunlight and disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Natalie leaned forward, pointing toward the house like she was trying to make sense of a mirage. For a moment, no one moved. Then my mother's phone lit up in her hand, and mine began to ring again. I silenced it. Another call. Another. I watched their lips moving, confusion turning into panic, then indignation. They looked at each other, and finally both sets of eyes found me standing behind the glass. I didn't hide. I let them see me, not angry, not defiant, just steady. They crossed the street, hesitating at the gate. My mother called out, her voice muffled by distance. I couldn't hear every word, but I could guess them explanations, disbelief, the demand for control she'd perfected over years of parenting through fear and pride. I opened the front door slowly and stepped onto the porch. The breeze lifted the edge of my hair, carrying the scent of fresh paint and cut grass. My mother stopped at the walkway, clutching her purse as though it might protect her. Natalie trailed half a step behind her heels, tapping against the stone. "Jade," my mother said finally, her voice small. "What is going on?" "Whose house is this? Mine," I said quietly. "All mine." The silence that followed stretched thin, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Natalie blinked, her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. "That's not possible," she said. "This property was listed for nearly $3 million. 2.7, I corrected. I offered 3. My mother's head shook in disbelief, the same motion she used whenever I disappointed her. "If this is some kind of joke, it isn't." She stepped closer, her tone shifting from disbelief to accusation. "How could you possibly afford this? You can barely pay rent. Are you working for the new owners?" "I am the new owner," I said. "I bought it 2 weeks ago, all cash." Her breath caught, and Natalie's expression shifted from confusion to calculation. "That doesn't make sense," she murmured. "You've never had that kind of money. Unless—" She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Unless someone helped you. Who's backing you, Jade?" "No one," I said. "I built something. You just never cared to ask what it was." They exchanged glances, disbelief melting into unease. Kyle's SUV pulled up just then, tires crunching on the pavement. He climbed out, still in his golf clothes, holding his phone like it was an accessory to his confidence. "What's going on here?" he called, walking toward us. "Natalie, you were supposed to meet me at the club." His voice stopped when he saw my mother's expression. "What's happening?" Natalie turned, pointing toward the house. "She says this place is hers." Kyle laughed under his breath. "That's impossible. I know the market. Who's it listed under?" "Me," I said. Jade Harris. He frowned, but the listing said J.H. Morris. That's my professional name, I answered. Harris Morris. It's what I use for my business. Something flickered behind his eyes. He was connecting dots, just not the right ones yet. Wait a second, he said slowly. Creator Space was founded by J.H. Morris and Marcus Chen. He looked directly at me. Are you saying? Yes, I said. That's me. I co-founded Creator Space. The realization rippled through them. Natalie's mouth fell open. My mother blinked rapidly, and Kyle stood frozen, every ounce of certainty drained from his face. Kyle's voice finally broke the quiet. That platform? Our firm uses it. It's one of the fastest-growing software companies in the country. How gratifying to have your approval, I said gently. My mother clutched her necklace as though it could hold her upright. All these years, she whispered, you let us think you were struggling. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I said, because every time I tried to show you who I was, you laughed. Diana stepped forward, trembling slightly. You should have told us. We could have helped you invest plan. I have a financial team, I said, and an attorney. I'm doing just fine. Her hand hovered toward me, but I stepped back before she could touch my arm. Jade, darling, we're so proud of you, she said quickly, tears brightening her eyes. What a wonderful surprise. You must tell us everything. Did you win an award? A prize? No, I said, my voice steady. I worked for it. Every late night, every risk, every sacrifice. None of you believed it would amount to anything, so I stopped asking for approval. Natalie's tone softened, but it was the softness of calculation. We could have guided you, she said. You're talented, but you don't understand what to do with money at this level. Kyle can introduce you to the right people. I already have the right people, I replied, and none of them need to be impressed. Her expression hardened, the sisterly mask slipping. You can't shut us out like this, Jade. We're family. I looked at her, then really looked. The flawless makeup, the perfect posture, the fear beneath the confidence. You loved a version of me that made you comfortable, I said. But that version doesn't live here. Kyle tried to salvage the moment, his tone adopting the authority he used at board meetings. You've done well for yourself, he said, half smile, half condescension. But managing wealth is complex. I'd hate to see you make mistakes. I turned to the mover beside me who was holding a box. The piano goes in the living room, I said quietly. The man nodded, disappearing inside, with a gentle, yes, ma'am. When I turned back, my family stood clustered at the edge of the driveway, the three of them bound by disbelief. My mother's tears had dried into confusion. Natalie's jaw was tight. Kyle folded his arms defensive in the face of a truth he couldn't control. I think it's time you left, I said softly. Jade, don't do this, my mother pleaded. We can celebrate. Have dinner. Invite the twins. Not today. My voice didn't rise, but it carried enough weight to stop them. I need space. You'll hear from me when I'm ready. Natalie stared, the silence stretching between us. This isn't fair, she said quietly. No, I said, but for once, it's mine. I walked back up the porch steps and stood at the door until I heard their engines start. As the sound faded down the street, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The house around me was still sunlight moving across the hardwood like the slow sweep of time. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Later that evening, as boxes settled and the movers left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window overlooking the quiet street. Messages started coming in almost immediately. Missed calls, long texts full of apologies and explanations, questions and guilt. I read a few, then silenced the phone again. I didn't feel triumphant, just peaceful. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking to be seen. Over the next few days, the calls turned to emails. My mother alternated between affection and accusation, offering help one moment and guilt the next. Natalie sent links to articles about women in tech leadership with notes like, "You remind me so much of these amazing women." I answered only once. "Thank you. I'm fine." A week later, while unpacking in the office, the security system pinged someone at the gate. I pulled up the camera feed and saw a familiar face. Natalie stood outside wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual polished armor. The sight was disorienting. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of certainty. I could have ignored it. I almost did. But something in her posture, the stillness, the way her hands fidgeted, made me pause. I buzzed her in. She walked up the path, slowly stopping just short of the patio where I stood. "Your house is beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied. She looked around, then back at me. I wanted to talk. Just us. Her voice held no edge this time, only something that sounded like regret. "I've been thinking about how I treated you," she said. "About how we all did." I waited. "I needed you to stay where you were," she said after a moment. "It made my life make sense. You following your own path?" It scared me. It made me question everything I'd built. The honesty in her words caught me off guard. I pulled out a chair for her, and she sat eyes on the garden instead of me. "When Dad died," she continued, "Mom pushed me into being the perfect daughter, and I played along because it made her proud. But I didn't want any of it, not finance, not the house, not the constant performance." She took a breath. "I never told anyone that, not even Kyle." The air between us softened. I saw her not as the golden sister, but as a woman who had been just as trapped by expectation as I had been dismissed by it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quietly. "I just didn't want you to think I was proud of how I acted." I studied her for a long moment, unsure what to say. Finally, I nodded. "Thank you for saying it." She looked relieved. "Is it too late?" she asked. "For us to have a real relationship?" I thought about the years of distance, the unspoken wounds. "Maybe not," I said, "but it would have to look different." "I can't go back. I don't want to," she said quickly. "I just want to start over." For the first time, she smiled, a small, uncertain one that reminded me of the sister I'd known before. Life turned her into someone else. We sat there for a while, the sound of water from the garden fountain filling the silence. The sun dipped low, painting the house in gold. For the first time in years, the quiet between us didn't hurt. When she left, I stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down the street. I didn't know where our relationship would go from there, but for once, that uncertainty didn't frighten me. It felt honest. Inside the house was warm with lamplight. I ran my hand along the piano, the surface smooth under my fingers. The reflection staring back wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. It was someone finally standing in her own life with no one left to shrink for. And somewhere deep inside, I could feel the beginning of something softer. Not revenge, not triumph, but healing, slowly, finding its way home. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, painting soft shapes on the marble countertop. I stood barefoot, stirring coffee that had long gone cold, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. It had been only a day since Natalie left, yet the conversation kept replaying in my mind. Her voice stripped of performance, her honesty trembling but real. I wasn't sure what to do with it. After years of distance and resentment, her vulnerability felt almost foreign. Still, there was a weight that had lifted slightly, like a window cracked open in a stale room. A faint knock echoed from the front door. I expected another delivery or maybe a neighbor introducing themselves. But when I opened it, Marcus stood there smiling in that steady way he always did. His hair was damp from the morning mist, his hands holding a box labeled Home Office. Fragile. I found this in the last storage unit, he said. Thought you'd want it before I start reorganizing the design files. I stepped aside, motioning him in. You really didn't have to bring it yourself. He shrugged, setting the box on the kitchen island. I wanted to see how you're settling in. How's the quiet treating you? I poured him a cup of coffee, sliding it across the counter. Strangely peaceful, I said, though it feels like the calm before something I can't name. He leaned against the counter, eyes warm but curious. And your family? I exhaled slowly. Natalie came by yesterday. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That sounds eventful. It was different this time, I said. She didn't come to argue or pretend. She came to tell the truth. He waited, letting the pause do the work. She admitted she's not happy, I continued, that she built her whole life around what Mom expected. She said she needed me to be the one who failed because it made her choices feel right. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's more honesty than most people manage in a lifetime. I didn't know what to say. I admitted. I told her we could start over carefully. I don't think she even knows who she is without the script Mom wrote for her. He smiled faintly. Sounds like both of you are rewriting a few chapters. Something in the way he said it lingered soft but certain. He reached into the box, pulling out a framed photo, the two of us standing in the old office grinning after the creator space acquisition deal closed. I remembered that night clearly, the tired joy, the disbelief that years of quiet labor had turned into something tangible. Marcus set the frame on the counter, his fingers brushing the edge. You've come a long way, Jade, he said. Don't forget to look around once in a while. That afternoon, as he left for a meeting, the house felt larger again. I wandered through it slowly, letting the silence breathe. The walls didn't echo like they used to. They held stories now, laughter, tears, the hum of something alive. By the end of the week, I had unpacked the last of the boxes. In the living room, I opened the piano and let my hands find the keys playing a soft tune I used to hum as a child. It wasn't perfect, but the notes filled the house with something tender and human. For the first time in years, I wasn't playing to prove anything. I was playing because I could. The sound carried out to the patio, where a gentle wind moved through the dogwoods. I thought about my father, the way he'd hum under his breath when he fixed things around the house, never realizing that small acts could mean more than grand gestures. He would have liked this home, I think. It was honest. A few days later, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something inside me told me to answer. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Jade. Hi, Mom. I wanted to tell you. She hesitated. I've started seeing a therapist. The words caught me off guard. Really? Yes, Natalie said it's helping her. She thought it might help me too. I've had 2 sessions already. I leaned against the counter, listening to the uncertainty in her tone, the kind that comes when someone steps into unfamiliar territory. How's it going? I asked gently. Uncomfortable, she admitted with a nervous laugh. But necessary. I'm realizing I may have been harder on you than I meant to be. After your father died, I was terrified. I thought if I kept everything controlled, nothing else would fall apart. Her honesty settled like a quiet weight between us. I could almost hear the hum of the old house in the silence that followed. I'm sorry, Jade, she said, for all the times I made you feel small, for not seeing who you really were. It wasn't the dramatic apology I might have once wanted, but it was real. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you think." "I'd like to see you," she continued, hesitant. "When you're ready. No expectations, no pressure." "I'll think about it," I said. "But there's something I need first, some conditions." "Of course, no more comments about my career or my finances. No comparisons between me and Natalie, just curiosity. Get to know me as I am, not as you wish I were." There was a pause, then a quiet breath. "I can do that," she said. "I want to do that." After the call ended, I stood there for a long time, the line still open in my mind. For years, I had imagined this kind of conversation and doubted it could ever happen. Now that it had, I didn't feel triumph, just calm acceptance. Later that evening, Natalie texted me a photo of a museum program, Art History 101, Rediscovering Perspective. Beneath it, she'd written, "I finally signed up for something I want to do." I smiled. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was progress. Over the following weeks, my life took on a rhythm that felt steady for the first time in years. The creator space transition continued smoothly, and the new team handled expansion with care. I spent mornings working from my home office, afternoons walking along the lake, evenings on the porch with a cup of tea. Marcus came by often, sometimes for business, sometimes just to share dinner. His presence fit naturally into the quiet of the house, never intrusive, always easy. One night, as we sat on the patio, watching the last light fade, he reached for my hand without speaking. The gesture was simple, but spoke of something steady and unspoken between us. I didn't pull away. A week later, I hosted a small housewarming for friends, the people who had seen me through the long nights, the failures, the rebuilding. The living room glowed with soft music and laughter. Rachel brought flowers and hugged me like she hadn't seen me in years. "You did it," she whispered. Toward the end of the evening, Natalie arrived quietly, early enough to help set up. She wore a soft blue dress and carried a homemade pie instead of a designer bag. I didn't comment, but I noticed. She spent most of the evening listening, really listening, asking my friends about their work, their art, their stories. It felt strange, but good. When the last guest left, she stayed behind, helping gather dishes. "Your friends are wonderful," she said. "They know the real you." "They do," I said simply. She set a plate down, turning to me. "I want to know that version too, if you'll let me." I nodded, one day at a time. As I walked her to the door, she hugged me, not the practiced embrace of social events, but a quiet, unsteady one. When she drove away, I stood on the porch, the cool night air brushing against my face, and realized how much the air between us had changed. The next morning, I woke early and wandered into the garden barefoot. The grass was still wet with dew, the lake beyond the trees shimmering with first light. For years, my life had been a series of battles to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. Now, for the first time, I felt no need to fight. Inside, the piano waited. I sat and played again, slower this time, letting the melody linger in the air. It wasn't about accomplishment anymore. It was about belonging to myself, to this space, to the life I had chosen. Somewhere in the background, my phone buzzed a message from my mother. "Therapy is hard, but I'm learning. Thank you for being patient with me." I smiled, letting the sound of the piano fade. The morning sun reached across the floorboards, filling the room with quiet light. Everything was still unfinished, still uncertain, but it was enough. And for the first time in a long while, that was exactly what I wanted, enough. The sun rose slow and deliberate that morning, spilling soft light through the curtains and over the floorboards. The house was quiet, except for the faint rhythm of rain tapping the glass, a sound that always made the air smell clean. I stood by the kitchen window, watching droplets chase each other down the pane, and realized how different the quiet felt now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the kind that settles after a storm when everything broken has found a place to rest. The coffee pot gurgled behind me, filling the air with its familiar scent. I didn't hurry. The stillness had become part of my routine, like breathing. 6 months had passed since I'd moved into this house, and it had started to feel less like proof of success and more like a reflection of calm, a place built with patience, not pride. I'd filled it with pieces that told small truths, the ceramic mug from a local artist, the family photo of my father before the gray set in his hair, the framed sketch my mother sent after her 3rd therapy session. Underneath it, she'd written, "Still learning to see." The doorbell chimed around 9. When I opened it, Natalie stood on the porch holding a bouquet of sunflowers. The sight made me smile. She'd once said flowers were an unnecessary expense. "Good morning," she said softly. "Mom's parking behind me. She wanted to bring dessert." I stepped aside and let her in. The smell of rain followed her. A few moments later, my mother appeared carrying a dish covered with foil. She looked older but lighter, as though shedding years of performance had finally eased her posture. Her eyes met mine with a steady warmth that still surprised me sometimes. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said. Natalie insisted on helping me bake, though I suspect she mostly supervised. "I stirred," Natalie said with mock offense, setting the flowers on the counter. The small joke hung in the air, gentle and real. We sat at the dining table, the same table that had once hosted years of awkward dinners and measured words. Today, the space felt different, easier, less haunted by comparison. My mother served slices of pie, her hands trembling only slightly. "This is lovely, Mom," I said. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," she replied. "It's nice doing something simple together. I've realized most of the things I thought mattered don't matter at all." She smiled faintly, her voice warm but uncertain. "It's been humbling in the best way." Natalie nodded. "We've all been unlearning things." The room settled into a quiet that didn't demand anyone fill it. For years, our family dinners had been noisy, not from laughter, but from trying too hard to be perfect. Now the clinking of forks and the sound of rain outside felt like music. After lunch, Natalie helped me clean up while Mom wandered through the living room, pausing in front of the piano. "You've been playing again," she said, running her fingers lightly over the keys. Sometimes I answered. "When the mood fits. I remember when your father used to listen from the hallway," she said quietly. "He'd say you had his ear for melody." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She smiled at me, then not the rehearsed smile I grew up with, but one shaped by something fragile and true. "Thank you for letting me come," she said. "Thank you for coming," I replied. They left just before evening. As their cars pulled away, the house settled back into its steady heartbeat. I watched the rain ease into mist, leaving drops clinging to the dogwood leaves like small glass beads. Somewhere in the distance, a fairy horn drifted across the lake. Marcus came home just after sunset. He found me in the kitchen barefoot, turning off the coffee pot I'd forgotten earlier. "How'd it go?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "Better than I expected," I said. "We didn't fix everything. But maybe it's not about fixing anymore." He smiled. "Maybe it's just about showing up." We ate dinner on the back patio, the air still carrying the smell of rain and cedar. The city lights shimmered across the water like tiny fires. When the dishes were cleared, Marcus poured us each a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair. "You ever think about how far you've come?" I looked at him, And then at the home around us, the walls painted in colors I'd chosen without apology. The art collected from friends, the piano quietly reflecting the lamplight. Every day, I said. But mostly, I think about how I finally stopped needing to prove it. He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. A week later, we hosted a small dinner. Nothing formal, just family and a few close friends. Rachel brought flowers again, laughing as she arranged them in a vase. "This place suits you," she said. "It's peaceful, like it knows you." Natalie arrived early to help bringing a salad, and her boys, who darted around the living room with toy airplanes. My mother came last, her arms full of ingredients for a recipe she swore she wouldn't overcomplicate. Kyle followed, carrying a bottle of wine and looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He'd left his firm to start a smaller business investing in local shops, something that, according to Natalie, made him happier than he'd been in years. Dinner was easy. No one performed, no one corrected. My mother even laughed when the twins spilled lemonade and Natalie joined in instead of scolding. When we sat down for dessert, my mother rested her fork and took a breath. "I want to say something," she said. The room fell still. "When your father died, I was terrified not just of losing him, but of losing control. I thought if I could keep you both inside a safe plan, nothing bad could happen. I see now that I only passed that fear on." Her voice wavered, but didn't break. "I'm sorry for how much I hurt you trying to protect you, both of you." Natalie reached over and took her hand. I didn't speak right away. The apology didn't erase the years, but it settled into the space like rain soaking into dry soil, quiet, necessary, and enough. When we finished dinner, everyone lingered by the piano. Natalie asked me to play something. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. My fingers found the keys almost on their own. The melody was simple, the one my father used to hum, and for a moment, it felt like the house itself was breathing with me. When I looked up, my mother's eyes were closed, her hand resting on Natalie's arm. The room glowed in the soft gold of evening. For the first time in a long while, we weren't defined by what we'd lost. We were simply a family imperfect healing, still learning how to stay. After everyone left, the house was full of quiet again. Marcus and I cleaned up stacking plates in the sink. He turned to me with a small smile. "That was good," he said. "It was," I agreed. "Simple and honest. Maybe that's all we ever needed." Later, I stood by the back door, the night stretching wide beyond the garden. The moon hung low over the lake, turning the water into liquid silver. The wind carried the faintest trace of lilac from the bushes I'd planted in spring. I thought about everything that had changed, not just the house, or the money, or the success, but the people. The girl who once begged for approval didn't live here anymore. The woman who did had learned that peace doesn't arrive like a gift. It's built one truth at a time. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the porch lamp spilling onto the floor. Somewhere upstairs, the piano sat waiting, silent but alive. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we finally let go. And sometimes letting go isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of peace. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever found peace after walking away from expectations, I'd love to hear how. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that heals slowly but lasts. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most beautiful homes are the ones where we can finally be ourselves.